Sis, being a side chick is part of your identity crisis. Welcome back to Culturally Booksmart. My name is Shantea Lewis, and I'm happy that you're in tuned and ready for episode 17. In today's episode, we're going to dissect why being a side chick is part of your identity crisis and how the historical fiction novel With Love from Harlem by Rashonda Tate proves this. To dissect how this historical fiction novel proves this video will be broken down into 3 acts. Act 1, we're going to dive into the formidable character Hazel Scott. Act 2, we're going to dissect Hazel's struggle between love and ego. And then in Act 3, we're going to dissect how Hazel ultimately loses herself as a result of being a side chick. Hopefully the last act will prove that being a side chick may be part of your identity crisis. And yeah, let's get into today's discussion. So when starting this book, I had no idea who Hazel Scott was, and you probably don't know who Hazel Scott is either. So I'm going to give you a mini history lesson on Miss Hazel Scott. Born in the port of Spain of Trinidad and Tobago and later raised in New York City, Hazel Scott was regarded as a child musical prodigy. She received scholarships to attend Juilliard School when she was 8, and throughout the 1930s and 1940s, she performed jazz, blues, ballads, Broadway, and boogie-woogie songs and classical music in various nightclubs. Barney Josephson, the owner of the Black and Tan Club Cafe Society, hired her, and from 1939 to 1943, she was a leading attraction at both the downtown and uptown branches of Cafe Society. Her performances created national prestige for the practice of swinging the classics, and along with Lena Horne, Scott was one of the first Black women to gain respectable roles in major Hollywood pictures. She refused to take roles in Hollywood playing a single maid, and she turned down the first 4 roles she was offered for this reason. When she began performing in Hollywood films, she insisted on having final cut privileges when it came to her appearance, and she also performed as herself in the films I Do It, Broadway Rhythm with Lena Horne, and the otherwise all-white cast of The Heat's On, Something to Shout About, and Rhapsody in Blue. She appeared in 5 Hollywood films and always insisted on the credit line Miss Hazel Scott as herself. And she always wore her own jewelry and clothing, which is also like a cool piece of information to know about her as well. And in her final break with Columbia Pictures, Harry Conan involved a costume where she felt stereotyped Black people. And now, notably, later in her career, she became the first Black African American to host her own TV series, The Hazel Scott Show. So she was the first person of African descent to have her own television show in America, The Hazel Scott Show, which premiered on the Dumont Television Network on July 3rd, 1990. So Variety reported that Hazel Scott has a neat little show in the modest package, in its most engaging element being Scott herself. And this show has become so popular, it soon ran 3 times a week. On the show, Scott performed with the jazz musicians Charles Mingus and Max Roach, who were among the members of the supporting band. In addition to this, Hazel Scott was a committed civil rights activist. Scott has been committed to civil rights. Scott refused to perform in segregated venues when she was on tour, and she was once escorted from the city of Austin, Texas by Texas Rangers because she refused to perform where she discovered that Black and white patrons were seated separately. So to evade political fallout in the United States, Scott decided to move to Paris in 1957. And in 1963, She marched with a number of other African American expats, including James Baldwin, to the U.S. Embassy in Paris to demonstrate support of the upcoming March on Washington. So, unfortunately, on October 2nd of 1981, Hazel Scott died of cancer at Mount Sinai Hospital, Manhattan, at age 61. So this is a little bio of Hazel Scott because I think it's important that we humanize the character in this novel. And yeah, just so that we all have some sort of understanding of who Hazel Scott is. If you still would like to learn more about Hazel Scott, I really recommend that you Google her, get more books, and even like watch the films that I listed there so you can understand who this lady was and the role that she played in society in the 1940s up to the time when she died. So anyways, this is some information on Hazel Scott, and now we are going to get into Act 2, which is we're going to dissect Hazel's struggle between love and ego, because I think this is probably the most interesting in this novel, and I think it also gives more context of why not a lot of women, but why women do decide to become side tricks, because there is internally a struggle between love and their ego and the ego of the person that they are involved with. So in the beginning of the novel, we are introduced to the talented and independent Hazel Scott. So in the beginning of this novel, for one, I was captivated by Hazel Scott because not only was she ambitious, but she was talented, and she was able to use her talent as a way to create a career, in a career that supported her and her mother financially. Which was really great. It was very empowering, even though we live in a world where that is a norm, where we find women balancing career, family, and themselves, which is great. But it was nice to see that done by an African American woman during a time of segregation, where you would think that patriarchy was such a thing then, but clearly not, because she was able to create a career for herself that supported her financially, and also gave her some sort of fulfillment. And that was really refreshing to read once I started reading this novel. And I also enjoyed the fact that she was an avid believer in the civil rights movement. Mind you, a lot of her focus throughout the book was heavily on her career and trying to open the doors for not only herself, but for other future colored women to have an opportunity to get into the spaces within the entertainment industry, to also have a fulfilling and successful career. So that was also something that I really enjoyed about the novel, is that she wasn't heavily focused, at least in the beginning, she wasn't focused on having a relationship or, having a relationship, but she was more focused on her career, which I respect as a young African Canadian, because I too believe that young women should always put their career first, and their education first, because that's what matters. Because ultimately, relationships sometimes don't always last, but the things that you have forever is the investment that you make into yourself, and the investment that you make into having a career that makes you feel fulfilled. And I really enjoyed that. So in the beginning, in terms of woman empowerment, perfect. And we also learned that Hazel was like a girl's girl, which is very ironic because the topic of this YouTube video is about side chicks, of her eventually, quote unquote, becoming a side chick. But in the beginning, she was very much a girl's girl, where she had her friends, she supported her friends, and she never hesitated to support another colored woman. which became very ironic and troubling once you realize that, okay, so if you're such a girl's girl in the beginning, then why is it that she's now okay with the idea of being with someone who is still in a relationship? Well, we're gonna get to that. But for right now, I want to focus on how, basically, on her character, on who she is and who the author and the narrator describe her to be in the beginning of the novel. And in the beginning of the novel, as a girl's girl, I can say that I loved her character and I really felt like I connected with Hazel. I really did. And I was like, wow, like, I'm excited to read this more and to see more of the great things that she does in her career. But that soon and unfortunately takes a dark turn. And that dark turn becomes the fact that once she meets this charming African American man who I believe is a pastor, his name is Adam. I feel that the ambitions, and this is my opinion, I feel that her ambitions of her career and putting her career first and making all these different, doing all these great things within her career and opening doors for other Black African American women kind of started to slow down after she met Adam. And it seemed that in the moment of her meeting Adam and Adam clearly showing that he has some sort of interest in her despite his wife being next to him, that she was okay with it. You kind of have to ask yourself, like, is Hazel really a girl's girl? And that's the question that I asked myself when I was reading. I was like, okay, well, if you're performing and some guy who's next to his wife is giving you googly eyes, I think as a girl's girl, we're going to be like, no, you're with your wife, have respect for your wife, not interested. But I don't feel like Hazel was having that internal dialogue with herself, which, yeah. So, anywho, Adam's pursuit of Hazel and her decision to entertain this pursuit, we begin to realize that she is complicit at least, with the information that Adam is giving her. And that information is that, oh, I'm going to get divorced, and, oh, like, I want the relationship to end, but she's, like, for some reason pressing her on, and her believing this and not really taking into account that, maybe the wife is not happy about the divorce. Maybe you are playing a part, or maybe you were expediting, a divorce between him and his wife from happening sooner. But she's not questioning anything, and to me, it seems that she likes the chase. And I also think what also makes her like the chase is because Adam is also like a notable in his career, where he is a pastor, and the son of a pastor, and he also has political aspirations where he wants to become a politician and really push forward the civil rights movement and make and to be a figure who gives African Americans the opportunity to be able to live within America freely and to have the same rights as their European counterparts, or their white counterparts. So a part of me, after reading this, I thought to myself, I'm like, okay, you're entertaining this guy because he's notable, he has money, and he is at least giving you enough information to make you believe that he's not really cheating with you. It's more so he's in the process of getting a divorce. But we can read between the lines and know that Yeah, it's cheating if that person, at least if the and in the woman's in his wife's mind, there's still a possibility for them to work it out, and if they're also still living together. So, anyways, however, once they do decide to get into this relationship and he decides to fully, fully push forward with his divorce from his wife, we begin, at least me in my opinion, I begin to think that Hazel used, I begin to feel that Hazel and Adam actually used their relationship as a tool to attain authority, opportunities, and prestige. And maybe this is why Hazel, in this moment, decided not to be a girl's girl, because in her mind, she felt that, okay, well, I can gain from this relationship. And yeah, the gain it may not be a moral gain, but the gain could be that I would be in a power couple. I would be, beside someone who's fighting within the civil rights movement, and I too can have the opportunity to also, have some sort of impact in the civil rights movement. And I think in terms for Adam, I think why Adam also, you know, pursued Hazel, because it also would give him a level of prestige where Hazel, in a sense, becomes a trophy wife. Like, oh my God, you have one of the greatest music artists around, and she is your wife or she is your partner. And it becomes more of a status symbol rather than true love. And I think that it's very important that we take this into consideration when we try to understand why some women decide to be side chicks. Because ultimately, if you are deciding to be with someone who is in a relationship, that means that in that person's mind, or at least the woman's mind who is the side chick, she's thinking that the gain, you know, the gain outweighs the cons of not being a girl's girl. And that is what I feel like the struggle between love and ego, at least with Hazel and Adam, really pinpoints to. And we as women have to think, okay, if another woman was to enter our relationship and want our significant partner, and it goes either way, it could be, yeah, if a person wants to come into the relationship and take our partner, it's not more in the sense of they're trying to personally attack me, but it's more so what can they gain from this person, and understanding that whatever they can gain outweighs how it may affect their partner emotionally. And I think that's an important thing for us to consider. And I think that Rashonda Tate does an amazing job in showing this, in the dynamics between Adam and Hazel. And a lot of people may not agree with me. Some women may feel that, men don't really care. Women don't really care about what a guy has and blah, blah, blah. Like, some women just want to be homewreckers, and some women just want to be side chicks because they have no self-worth. And that's a fine argument, and that's fair to state that. However, in this book, I think that Rashonda looks at a different side to being looks at the psychology of a side chick differently, and that psychology is based on self-gain, recognition, status, and really seeing like, how can this person help elevate me? And I think that's the side of the spectrum that Rashonda does perfectly in this book, to really kind of explain why some women decide to be side chicks. So anyways, if you don't agree with me, that's fine. But if you want to explore more on my opinion on this, I definitely feel that you need to read this book to really understand the dynamics between Adam and Hazel, and really understand why Hazel decided to ignore the fact that she was a side chick. And she was potentially hurting another woman, and their kids. So emotionally, hurting another woman and their family emotionally. So, yeah, that's just how I feel about it. And that is why I think that's the struggle between love and ego that I think really pinpoint in terms of the psychology of those who decide to infiltrate someone's relationship. Okay, so in Act 3, we're going to dissect how Hazel ultimately loses herself as a result of being a side chick. So despite knowing that she may have played a role in the destruction of Adam's previous marriage, I don't think Hazel thought that her marriage to Adam would end like his previous marriage, or that her self-esteem would be tarnished due to Adam's infidelity. So, due to her identity being built around her talents and ambitions, the acceptance of Adam's possible infidelity, in which she was the side chick, clearly numbed her self-value and worth. So, ultimately, towards the end of the novel, this numbness manifests itself physically when she faints after witnessing Adam's cheating. And I believe this moment is monumental and proves that being a side chick not only blinds your judgment, but it also leaves you deteriorated in an obscured reality that side chick has created. Now, so are side chicks going to learn from Hazel and choose an identity that made them that girl, or are they going to choose a man that is looking for validation rather than love? I don't know. I can't tell you. But I think for me, in terms of reading this book and, learning from Hazel's experience, I think it's important as women that we choose ourselves, and we also choose a partner that chooses us, in a sense where, you choose a partner that they remain committed to you, and they don't make you feel that you're not enough. And I think that as women, sometimes, unfortunately, we don't really go for men like that. Most women decide to go for men that can give them some sort of gain, and they're willing to turn a side eye to that man's infidelity as a result. But as a woman, if you can provide for yourself and do everything for yourself, and you have a great career and you have talents and you're ambitious, there's no reason to settle for another man. You can make even as much impact, if not greater of an impact, with just choosing yourself and being alone, or just waiting, or being alone and waiting for that right person to enter your life. And I think that this novel is perfect for women that are side chicks, for women that are married, for women that want to start dating. I think that this book is great because it really makes you reevaluate your worth, and really makes you reevaluate, it makes you understand and appreciate the importance of a girl's girl. As a girl's girl, it's important that we lift each other up, and that we don't tear each other down. And I think this book is perfect for that as well. So do I recommend this book? 100,000%. Because not only do you learn about who Hazel Scott is, and I had no clue who she was until reading this book, but you also, it also teaches you about the importance of self-worth and self-value, and to never diminish your light for another person. And I think that is one of the greatest lessons that this book has. Sometimes when you're reading a book, you don't want a lesson. You just want to, get lost in some sort of like fictional world. But I feel like in every story, there is a lesson, and in every lesson, there's something that we can apply within our lives. So anyways, I think this book was phenomenally written. I think that Rashonda Tate is a phenomenal writer, and I look forward to reading and more of her work, and doing reviews on more of her work as well. And I just love that not only are you getting lost in the world of Hazel Scott, but again, you are taught a lesson, and that lesson is one of that lesson, sorry, is that being a side chick, not worth it. Not. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Now, if you are a side chick or know someone that is a side chick, do you believe they are experiencing an identity crisis? And if you do or if you don't, let's discuss in the comments below. So, as always, I love you guys so much, and thank you so much for listening and watching today's episode. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!